En vanuit Berlijn schakelen we nu door naar Tallinn in Estland, met hulp van Ronald van Erven in Perth, Australië.
In this session, we'll be exploring with the use case of Estonia, how digitization can bring efficiencies, cost savings, but also facilitate, for example, digital voting, which is of importance to people outside the borders. So the Dutchies outside the Netherlands. And for that, Carmen will give us some more info on e-Estonia and how they created this digital society. So Carmen, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I will share my slides quickly, and I will keep this part very brief, but I think that it will be better for our conversation next on. So my name is Carmen Raal. I work at the e-Estonia Briefing Center as a digital transformation advisor. And just a small fun fact, in Estonia, 99.99% of public sector services have been digitalized. So we are at this point where at the moment there's only one service that's not possible to do online in Estonia, but we are in the process of digitalizing that as well. And that's divorce. So currently you can file for divorce online, but if you wait for a year, that's also going to be a possibility in Estonia. But in order to enable all of this, we have sort of basic mechanisms that enable all of this. So first of all, in order to access a myriad different digital services, we have to have a way to safely identify ourselves. So this is why in 2002 already Estonia issued a state-released electronic identity. So it has been working for us for more than 20 years now. And this enables us to access all of those different state-provided services, but not only that. So we don't normally use public sector services so often. So the true secret behind the success of our electronic identity is our incredibly extensive public-private partnership. So when local banks and telecoms initially took over the same eID we use for public sector services, it became incredibly easy for people to adopt the system for absolutely everything. So it meant that we do log into our online bank several times per week, right? So when once per year we had to declare our taxes, we didn't have any problems in trying to learn how the electronic identity works or how to access online services. And our ID card became the first eID carrier. It's a card that allows us to identify ourselves in our physical world as well. It doesn't possess a lot of information, so we don't have any home addresses, for example, publicly displayed. But we do have a personal code. So every person in Estonia has a unique number, but this is not a secret number. So some of you might be familiar with the social security number that exists in the US. These are completely different. So if you know my personal code, you can't steal my identity. But it is necessary, though, because my name is not enough to access online services, simply because more people might be named Carmen Raal. And currently we're not using biometrics to identify people for online services. So this is where the ID card comes in, or our personal code. And our ID card became the first eID carrier. Behind the card, we have a chip. And with the card, it's issued by the Police and Border Guard in Estonia. We get 2 pins. So the first pin allows me to identify myself online, and the second pin allows me to sign documents electronically. And our law says that my electronic signature is completely equivalent to my signature given with a pen on a paper, meaning nowadays in Estonia, we rarely have to sign something on actual paper physically, because Estonians trust the electronic signature more. It's easily verifiable. For example, when I lived in Hong Kong, there the practice was to compare different signatures with magnifying glasses or with the magnifying loop. In Estonia, that's not a necessity. And in order to steal someone's electronic identity, you always need two things. So you need the eID carrier and the pins. So one without the other is completely useless. If you find my ID card on the ground, you can't steal my electronic identity. So the eID became the first, the ID card became the first eID carrier. But nowadays, unfortunately, it's not the most convenient solution, because for that you do have to have access to your computer and you have to have an ID card reader or a special computer where the reader is built in. And we have to make sure that people are comfortable using online services and they have the easiest possible access. So this is why the second eID carrier became mobile ID. So mobile ID requires us to get a new SIM card. That SIM card possesses the same chip. And now we can simply use our phones to identify ourselves. And why mobile ID is more accessible is because it doesn't require us to have internet connection, meaning that people with more old-fashioned phones, not having smartphones, they can still use mobile ID. And last but not least, we have Smart ID. So Smart ID requires us to download an application, and we first identify ourselves with our mobile ID or our ID card. And once we've done that, we can simply continue using the application. So different modes to identify ourselves online, but one electronic identity. This keeps our system very simple, and simplicity with these things is always the key. And now to the second important part of our digital infrastructure, it's our X-road. So this is sort of the backbone of e-Estonia. We have a very decentralized way we've built everything up. So data about me does not exist only in one place. We have hundreds of different databases. But if we talk about especially public services, then we need to provide a lot of information about ourselves. And this is where the X-road comes in. So it allows the data to travel across public internet, which makes it simple. But what makes it safe is the fact that the data is always end-to-end encrypted. And basically nowadays, this is a very wholesome ecosystem where all the public databases are required to be, but always minimal amount of information is released. So just because you're somewhere in that ecosystem doesn't mean automatically you have access to anything. And it allows us to implement something called the once only principle. And basically the once only principle allows us to not duplicate data. So if my address is stored at the population register, it shouldn't be stored anywhere else, because anybody who has to have access to it, they can do it via the X-road. So very simply put, we have done a good job to eliminate the issue of data silos. And actually, I would argue that Estonia stores less data about people here compared to countries that are less digitalized, simply because we don't have to hoard data and we don't have data silos. So for example, different agencies or ministries providing services, they don't have to keep all of this data in their own database. And what we've estimated is that our X-road saves us around 3 million working hours annually, and we can provide over 3,000 different services. And we do 2.5 billion transactions per year thanks to the X-road. So it's quite heavily used because our population is just 1.3 million people. So I hope that this, for a further conversation, allows you to have a better image of how public sector services or online services in general work in Estonia.
Let's go over to some maybe questions Q&A session. Willem, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, I was wondering, we looked in the last couple of weeks a lot about e-Estonia. What is the public opinion in Estonia with the people of Estonia and within your political sphere about using all these e-services? And do the people trust the services you have provided?
Well, it definitely depends on the service. Normally, people like to live a convenient life, and people, well, they don't have the time to go to different offices and wait in long queues or figure out what documents to collect. So these are the aspects that our digital solutions have basically completely eliminated for people. So nowadays, 98% of people choose to declare their taxes online. Why I'm saying choose to, because there's still the option to go to an office and declare your taxes the more traditional way. And our system benefits the both sides, because if you don't, for some reason, if you don't know how to declare your taxes online, or if you don't want to, then you don't have to wait in huge queues, because the majority of people choose to do everything online. But if we talk about other services, for example, iVoting, then for this March, when we had our parliament elections, 51% of people chose to vote online, and of voters, and the others, they went to the ballot boxes. So it really depends on the service, and is it just a simple administrative burden it helps us to alleviate, and more people will opt for online services. But with voting, for example, it's a bit more complicated, because for some people going to the ballot box, it's a special day for them, because they fought for our freedom, they remembered the different system and so on. So yes, very much depends on, but normally people, they don't really object to services that make their lives easier. But maybe iVoting can be categorized as the only controversial digital service in Estonia, because there are some people who feel that it's not safe to use, and it's completely fine, because we're not forcing people to use internet voting. The ballot boxes are always going to be there, and we're keeping them quite traditional. So you're putting an envelope to the basket, and that's it.
So with this digital society, what did Estonia is? By the way, e-Estonia is a government agency, or is it a public-private corporation?
So we are part of the public sector, and but we do cooperate quite extensively with the private sector. So as a tiny country, that's something that's sort of necessity for us. And we recognize that this extensive public-private partnership is one of the reasons why we've been so successful, especially in the field of digitalizing services and making them popular. But yes, e-Estonia is part of the public sector.
And did Estonia do, I'm calling it something special, had a special program in place to create this digital culture, or an ID card is mandatory, that's one thing, but you need to get all the people on board. And what did Estonia do to get this digital culture going?
Yes, this is a great question, because simply by making something mandatory doesn't mean that people start using it, especially because till this day, people can choose to go to an office. And maybe something I want to emphasize is that the mandatory part, it's a more symbolic thing. Because if someone's ID card expires, they don't apply for a new one, they're not fined or thrown to jail or anything like this. But the first part that allowed us to make it so popular is this extensive public-private partnership, especially when it comes to the electronic identity. We use online banking far more extensively than we use public sector services, and this simply allowed us to adopt the system. So it does not matter which bank I use in Estonia. They all use the state-issued electronic identity. But the second part is that already in 90s and early 2000s, we recognized how important it is to give people ICT literacy skills. And still this day, it's quite important for us, because first of all, 99.99% of public sector services are online, and it's convenient for the state. If more people use online services, naturally, it tends to be cheaper. And also, jobs not requiring any ICT skills are disappearing. So we need to future-proof our people. So we're still focusing on different ICT programs, but it's on early days, it started from two bigger programs. One of those was called Tiger Leap. So Tiger Leap by 2000 gave every school, or provided every school in Estonia with computers. And in 2001, they all had broadband connection, which maybe for the Netherlands or people in the Netherlands doesn't seem that significant. But for us in early days, this was a huge leap forward. And since then, we've made it mandatory for children to learn how to use computers. And computer education has evolved with time. So kids start from primary school, they're learning robotics and coding and all of that through playful means. But also simultaneously, when Tiger Leap was taking place, there was another project called Look at World. And Look at World was completely private sector funded, by the way, because for the private sector, it was also important that people knew how to use online services. So with this project, around 100,000 people got to learn how to use computers for free. And this is just the beginning. So we're still focusing heavily on ICT literacy programs, making sure that they're accessible and that they're catered, for example, either for the elderly or for people who have already more know-how and so on. And the second aspect is cyber hygiene, making sure that people know how to protect themselves online, because risks, unfortunately, also exist online, although they're different. So this is to sum everything up. First of all, public-private partnership, making sure that these solutions not only work for public sector services, but also for the private sector ones. Something I forgot to talk about the extra is that the private sector can also join this ecosystem, and if the case is there, they can also access publicly stored data. So this private partnership is truly extensive. And the second is that we make sure that people have access to ICT literacy education.
How do you guarantee safe and fair elections in Estonia? And maybe also as a follow-up question, don't you worry that foreign powers might intervene within your elections?
So to the very last question, yes, we worry, and we're making sure that this interference doesn't really jeopardize the democracy we have in Estonia. But coming back to iVoting, to your first question, so since 2005, we've had iVoting for every possible election, both local government, parliament, and EU parliament elections. And so far, we can say that our elections or in iVoting has been jeopardized. So there have been maybe cybersecurity incidents, but it has not been jeopardized. In a more simpler sense, how to explain it, it looks quite similar to the envelope system that people who try to vote abroad experience. So you have the envelope with your vote and nothing else. And then there's another envelope on top that also carries your identity. So basically, it's quite the same for us. So we're using public and private key to encrypt the file and decrypt the file. And also a crucial aspect is that we're quite transparent. So iVoting, it's an open source solution. So meaning that everybody can download the source code and study it for backdoors and so on. So this trust and transparency is quite important. But maybe the biggest concern that oftentimes people immediately don't think of is the responsibility that online solutions put on individuals. So if you go to a voting office, you can see that you're behind curtains, there's no one with you, it's completely anonymous. But if you're behind the computer, that's not something that we can guarantee, right? So how do we make sure that there's not someone behind the computer with me, making sure that that I'm not being forced to vote for a certain candidate? So in order to tackle these issues, we nowadays we start the iVoting period around 5 days earlier. And during this period, before the actual election day, I can change my vote as many times as I want. So essentially, it makes sure that if currently someone is here behind the computer with me, then later on I can use the iVoting application again and simply change my vote, and that's it. And if I still feel like this is not a safe solution or somehow I have not been given the privacy I need to vote, then if on the actual election day I go to a voting station, I can cast my vote the traditional way, and my iVote is going to be thrown away. And the second thing that is individuals' responsibility is to make sure that, for example, your computer doesn't have any bugs. To even make sure that the vote can travel to the vote storage. For that, we have a QR code that you can scan with your independent device to see if the vote has traveled securely to the voting station initially. Yeah, but during the election day, when the votes actually are being counted, then your identity is thrown away from the vote, and the actual vote will be the only thing that's going to be counted. So we're not collecting more statistics or information compared to regular voting, going to different ballot boxes and so on. But we can use it for statistics the same way as with regular voting. So we can see how many people used iVoting, and yeah, that's it basically.
Last question for you.
No, I think I was this was already fantastic. I'm through my whole list of questions. Yeah, I think maybe eventually the number one question which will dominate the discussion also eventually in the Netherlands, I incorporated that a little bit in the question, is are we 100% sure that foreign powers do not intervene into our elections?
First of all, I think that threats exist with all kinds of voting, right? So because we're so much online, then we can't avoid being manipulated with, right? So there are different bots and algorithms and so on. So in that sense, we're all affected. Doesn't matter what we use. But also many countries, they're using electronic voting. So they have electronic polling stations. So that's already a new type of risk, right? So nothing can be 100% secure, but you can mitigate a lot of those risks, and you can become cyber resilient. And we can't say in no ways that Estonian iVoting has been jeopardized or compromised and so on, but we are working relentlessly to make sure that this is still going to be an option in future elections as well. And one thing here, I know that Estonia is quite popular when it comes to digital solutions, and we are still the only country to allow nationwide iVoting, but there are countries that use iVoting as well, for example, for local elections. So Ontario in Canada, they're using iVoting, and number-wise, they have more people just in that region. So they have more people using iVoting. So actually, number-wise, Estonia is not at the top because we're a very tiny country, but percentage-wise, we are leading in that sense. So yes, risks exist, but you can mitigate them quite well. Transparency is incredibly important, and having a dialogue with people, helping them to understand how does it work, and hopefully this allowed everybody to start at least thinking of iVoting as an option, because I know I've also lived in 2 other places besides Estonia. So if I wouldn't have the option to use iVoting, I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't have voted at all. I'm ashamed to admit it. Nowadays, yes, I know how important it is to participate, but back then I was younger and I didn't really care about it as much. So the fact that it takes me just maybe 90 seconds to vote, that was the only thing that pushed me to vote anyways. If I would have taken the travel to go to an embassy and so on, I wouldn't have done it. Ashamed as I am to admit it.
Did I, by the way, understand it correctly? e-Estonia is willing to work with, call it other governments, other parties, to share the knowledge on this new digital society type services?
Yes, absolutely. So that's first and primary reason why our e-Estonia briefing center exists, because we get a lot of delegations coming to Estonia wanting to learn how we did everything that we did. So we have all of this know-how gathered to one place. Additionally, all of our solutions are open source, so that's for transparency reasons, but it also means that it's quite easy for other countries or regions to take them over. So I talked about the X-Road. X-Road is quite legendary still to this day. It was created in 2001. It's a cybersecurity miracle, essentially. And nowadays we can say that only Estonia is using it, because around 25 countries in one way or another, they're using the X-Road.
Thanks for that. Well, Carmen, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this incredible journey on the digitalized society and how this benefited Estonia. Yeah, thank you again, and hope to see you in future festivals.
Thank you so much for having me.